Right, so what you're looking at behind me is a map showing you clear as day how World War III has already begun. If you can't see it, then maybe you need to get your eyes checked or your brain checked, possibly. I'm going to explain why it is so abundantly clear to me now what is going on. And boy, is it really, really bad. It's really, really bad. The system is collapsing. If you haven't realized it yet, in every possible domain, we're in the midst of an epochal shift as a human civilization, and I don't know what's around the corner. Nobody does, but we just got to be grateful every single day that we're still here to tell the tale. Now, before I go into what this is all about, let me just enumerate all of the other stories today, and then we'll do a deeper dive. Russian pundits are completely furious. They're calling for the use of nuclear weapons more aggressively, more vehemently right now than ever before in response to what happened yesterday in Peskov. Way the hell off the beaten path, okay? And we're going to talk about how they did that. There's many concerns that NATO was directly involved in that, in fact, acting as a launching pad for these drones. But we'll talk about that in just a minute. Ukraine is making some significant headway in the southern direction, whether the Russia bros want to admit it or not. And that is not good news for the rest of us, because that means that this becomes far more important if we're talking about the possibility of this thing going nuclear. Tucker Carlson predicts USA goes to war with Russia in a year. I would presume that he's a fairly well-informed pundit, but then again, you just never know nowadays. Maybe he is just jumping on the political train that's associated with all of this. Even though, as we're going to talk about, the politics really doesn't matter, because the current administration is looking for ways so that they can guarantee the long-term support for Ukraine, even if the current executive branch of the U.S. government is changed out. We have Warren Buffett selling stocks, dumped $8 billion in stocks in just the past 3 months. What does he know that we don't? We have the United States adding $1.3 trillion in debt in the past 3 months. When you look at that Ukraine war funding and you realize that we've added or the United States, I say we because Canada and the United States, we're in the same boat. If you guys sink, we're tethered to that ship. We're going down right afterwards. So $1.3 trillion in debt in just the last 3 months. Think about that. How much of that actually went to Ukraine? Ukraine is peanuts compared to that. And they know it, and they realize the macroeconomic play that's involved here. Tech is rising once again in the markets, and that's because people are completely delusional for reasons as we're going to talk about. North Korea is simulating tactical nuclear strikes on the south, today firing 2 short-range ballistic missiles. The embassy in Haiti has been evacuated. There was a revolt in the African country of Gabon today. We also have African stability on the whole is increasing. And of course, we just have everything under the sun happening in Ukraine, all pointing towards this war is wildly out of control. I also have to provide more explanation to a comment I made in passing yesterday about how the Cuban Missile Crisis was not nearly as severe as the current crisis we're facing. I made a comment in passing where I basically said that we had less nuclear weapons during the Cuban Missile Crisis than we do now. Now, there's some truth to that. What I meant to say, what I should have said, is that we had less strategic nuclear weapons at that point in time. Russia had a handful. There's estimates between 4 and 33 during the Cuban Missile Crisis. So we're talking about 33 ICBMs, the most primitive ICBMs you can get. The United States at that time maybe had 170 to 200. So indeed, Russia would have been taken out. But the United States, was it totally existential? Most people, including John F. Kennedy at the time, didn't truly think so. I'm going to tell you probably 20 different reasons why what we're experiencing today is just on a whole other scale of scary than it was during the Cuban Missile Crisis, when people were actually concerned. Okay, there is video showing people panic buy during the, this is JFK, during the Cuban Missile Crisis, and very orderly panic buying. You would never see this today. People just, casually walking out with their grocery carts, one guy smoking a cigarette. Them's were the days, weren't they, when you could just smoke in the grocery store. But see, nowadays, there's a complete lack of consternation on the part of Westerners, which is incredibly concerning. And it is very, very scary because never in history have we been attacking Moscow with drones. And when I say we obviously, NATO is implicated in these attacks. There's no ifs, ands, or buts about it. Now, getting back to that point, let's just try to break this down. What was the Russian media's response? This is always what I look for. I go to TASS, I go to RIA Novosti, I go to Russia Today, and I always look at what was the Russian media's response when Pskov, a place that was just about 50 kilometers or so from the Estonian border, was attacked and targeted, successfully attacked several cargo planes in that region. What was the response of the Russian media to know that these 20 drones had to fly all the way around Belarus, okay, or maybe they went through Belarus, who knows? It's very unlikely though, because that of course would be a declaration of war, and then, you know, Belarus would have to get involved and blah, 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 even though they already are pretty much. Everybody's playing these word games right now. It's kind of weird. Anyways, they had to travel 700 kilometers around. So in the very least, NATO was involved in providing reconnaissance, information, sharing, telemetry, navigability using satellites, probably spies on the ground somewhere. NATO was most definitely involved in helping these drones get to that destination. How were the Ukrainians able to get 20 drones through Russian radar and missile defense, or anti-aircraft defense, I should say, and get to their target 700 kilometers from the Ukraine border? And of course, they're not launching them right from the Ukraine border. Who knows where they're launching them from? Probably even further into Ukraine. So the concern is, are they launching these drones from Estonia or Latvia? Or, not a lot of people are thinking about this, are they launching these drones from the Baltic Sea on some aircraft launchable vessel? Doesn't even have to be an aircraft carrier. I'm pretty sure these bobber drones or beaver drones don't need as long of a runway as normal planes. Is there a possibility that they're launching these things from international waters, which are just a couple hundred kilometers, as opposed to the 700 that it would have to take for them to go all the way into Ukraine? Sorry, the map looks like a murder mystery wall, I know, but boy, have we been busy, man. People ask me, Nate, why do you still got stickers on your hat? It's because I'm so busy, I don't have time to take the stickers off. If you have time to comment about the stickers on my hat, it's not a fashion statement. It's not because I'm trying to be hip. I realize I'm getting old. I'm over the hill. I'm cringy as hell. Trust me, my kids let me know every day. It's not about that. It's because I'm too busy. Right now, I don't even care. I'm going to leave these stickers on there till they fall off. We're going to roll it till the wheels fall off. We got bigger fish to fry, my friends. So the question is, why was the Russian media so hush-hush when these attacks happen? What the hell is going on? Well, you have to understand Putin's master plan. Putin is a high-level strategic thinker. When I say high-level, he is looking at this situation from space, and his generals are looking at it from, you know, maybe just slightly in the atmosphere, slightly above ground. They're seeing all the death and destruction on the ground. They're saying, why aren't we using our huge arsenal of tactical nuclear weapons? Why are we bombing the crap out of Kiev? Why aren't we carpet bombing these places? Why are we letting this guy walk around and fly around and truck in all of this military supplies from all over the world? Why are we letting them build, you know, training centers and F-16 training centers right next door in Romania? So they're going to just, you know, train all their guys, send them over from Romania, send the planes over, fly them right into Ukrainian airspace, and we're going to pretend we don't see that? And we're going to just play this word game that NATO is not technically, or Ukraine is not technically a de jure member of NATO. So there's people who are getting very, very upset with this. The Russian pundits are raging. Okay, one of the primary propagandists on Russian state-sponsored media is raging, and he is dissonant with the Russian media narrative right now, which tells me that the ghost of Evgeny Prigozhin is alive and well. If you don't know what's going on with Evgeny Prigozhin, he was the mercenary, you know, who tried to do the coup allegedly, he was mad at the Russian Ministry of Defense because he doesn't understand how they're trying to win this war. Putin is trying to win this war macroeconomically. He wants to make sure that Europe goes into recession, possibly depression, gets bankrupt, unstable. There's an uprising which causes the collapse of various European economies, hoping that, of course, the situation that's developing in Africa, I'm quite certain that both the Russians and the Americans have proxy conflicts, at least on a political level, going on there. So he's trying to play this long game, okay? And unfortunately, when you're a general on the ground seeing your men get massacred, you don't understand things from that perspective. Putin is, on the one hand, probably trying to prevent a nuclear war because he knows full well that whatever forces are trying to provoke a reactionary response from the Russians to these attacks way up here, like the one that happened in Peskov, he knows that perhaps there is somebody in the neoconservative community or otherwise who wants that kind of response so they can justify direct intervention and get this party started sooner than later. And it's not the kind of party you want to be at. It's a radiological party, if you catch my drift. So the Russian media was incredibly silent about these attacks on Peskov. They kept talking about how, yeah, 7 regions were targeted, but they drastically minimized the impacts of this attack. Now, a lot of the diehard Russia bros are going to say these pinprick attacks do nothing. They are not strategic. They have no effect ultimately on the outcome of this conflict. But as I said yesterday, it only takes a few fleas to drive a dog crazy. There is such a thing as death by 1,000 paper cuts, and one after the other. It's not just that you took out 4 planes, it's the fact that right now, as we speak, that airport is still shut down. You have to shut down airports, you have to close your airspace. That massively affects your economy when you have to do that. Already under the current sanctions regimes, they don't have the ability to just repair all these planes, and they need all of the equipment that they can get. The Ukrainians are systematically attacking critical infrastructure, just like the Russians are doing in Ukraine. Don't get me wrong, I'm not saying that the Ukrainians don't have the right to do this. This is, in fact, a war or special military operation, and I understand why they call it that, because, of course, the Russians are not going scorched earth just yet. It's almost like they're saving that if there is absolutely no other choice. Now, the Russians right now, and let me just get back to this point about the media. So the media was incredibly silent. That tells me, guys, that maybe there was something that Estonia was more complicit beyond and above just letting NATO fly its reconnaissance planes to relay that information to the Ukrainians to tell them where the planes were at that very moment. It almost starts to make me think that the Russian MOD and Vladimir Putin himself are ignoring it because they understand maybe what certain elements, be they special forces or, the whole Nord Stream crew, it's almost as if they know that they're trying to bait them into a bigger fight. And in acknowledging what happened here, then they would have to do something in Estonia, which of course would prompt the invocation of Article 5, and then that's it. Everybody to the bunkers, everybody to the stores to panic buy. Well, not the West, because we're completely oblivious zombies here. Not you guys, but everybody else. And I know that's an impudent thing to say, but it's the truth at this point in time, because it is what it is. So that's what I think is happening. I think there actually probably was more complicity than they're letting on. Otherwise, they would have came out and made a big statement about this. They would have said, hey, we think that the Baltic states are complicit in this. Now, they may down the road, but why not say something like that right out of the gates? There was some, like Sputnik did a piece on that they're investigating it, but nothing certain. And in fact, they were talking about attacks mostly in other parts that were targeted, as opposed to the big attack that happened at the airport there, which forced the airport to shut down. And so I'm actually quite concerned. And the question is how long is this patience going to last? Because they're going to become far more brazen if they allowed them to get away with these things, then the clock is ticking before the next major attack comes. And you can only allow so many attacks on your territory before people are rioting in the streets, not to stop the war, but to, in the spirit of Evgeny Prigozhin, we need to win this war faster. And that is what is haunting Putin right now. That's why they're so hush-hush about his funeral. It's not so much that Putin was worried about the coup and Evgeny Prigozhin taking over. Prigozhin seen his men dying on the battlefield, and he probably had the support of a lot of people who were also perplexed, like, what are we doing here? Why aren't we fighting this war as we know we could? What are you guys taking so long? It's because Putin knows that someday the war with NATO is going to start. And they are trying to hold in reserve everything they possibly can for when that moment arrives. And this is what people who are right on the front lines fighting those tactical battles, running those operations, might not see, even though they're right in the sense that indeed Russia probably could have ended this war, or they probably could have made more headway, and they probably could have done a lot of things differently. Probably, I say, because I don't know all the logistical situations on the ground, but it could just be the case that there's some, back channel communication that we don't even understand with the red line between Washington and Moscow, the lines that are allowed to be crossed. Somebody's having those conversations, or in the very least, we hope so that this thing does not escape us in terms of our ability to manage the escalation. So, in terms of what is happening in Robotyno right now, it appears as though the Ukrainians are making some headway approaching the Surovikin line, I believe it's called, one of the primary Russian defensive lines. Apparently they've bypassed a lot of the minefields now, and from here on in it's Dragon's Teeth and under a constant artillery barrage. But there is concern that they may actually be able to make it to Tokmek, and there are rumors, and I just say rumors because this is something being pumped out by the SBU. You can't believe anything that the Ukrainian SBU says as much as you can't believe anything the Russians say. Let's just face it. They're saying that the Russians are evacuating some forces from Tokmak. That's a concern, because if the Ukrainians make headway in the south, concurrent with these escalating bombardments into Moscow, deep into Moscow, next it's going to be St. Petersburg. You know how they keep going further and further and further. That means that we are getting clear. They're getting into a position where Putin is going to have no other choice but to utilize some of those options. Now, some people might say, no, he still has a choice to escalate it beyond a special military operation. But why hasn't he declared war yet? You really got to think about that. Why not just declare war on, maybe not on Ukraine, but, and some people say, well, there's all sorts of legal implications with that, and and in terms of the global international community, with the global legalese that goes along with that, there's it's just a more complicated state of affairs. So it's better to just pretend like it's not a war when it really is. But if the Russians are calling in reserves, their 76th Division, they're one of their elite Air Force divisions, in order to protect this region, maybe things aren't going nearly as well as a lot of the anti-NATO crowd would have you believe if the Russians are in fact evacuating Tokmak. Now, when the Russians are winning, I'm not concerned about nuclear war, believe it or not. Some people would say, no, if the Russians win in Ukraine, that's when they are right up against NATO, and that's when the actual likelihood for nuclear war increases. So long as the Ukrainians don't get into Crimea, which they are trying night after night with these speedboat raids and all this stuff, which are, mostly just for PR purposes. But that's when I'm starting to get concerned that Russia will have to do something far more haphazard and reactionary, as opposed to measured as it's been thus far. Now, some people think it's a trap. Some people think this, some people think that. Some people think they're going to do a cauldron and a pincer thing where they have all these guys in Robotyno, and maybe they're going to drop a nuke there. Maybe they're just going to drop a bunch of FOABs or MOABs, or maybe they're going to just try to enclose them in, cut off the supply line, or do something like that, and it's all a trap. Who knows? We're not really going to know. But right now, the war is peaking, it seems. Like everybody is so confident the war is going to be over by next year. It's going to be this and that. No, it's not. You have F-16 training centers being built in Romania. Right now, being built in Romania, just across the street. In what fantasy land do we truly think that these planes and these tanks, these hundreds of tanks coming from Germany now, the Taurus missiles, which you know they're going to come to. I mean, we're months away from that. In what fantasy world do you truly think that all these supplies can continue to come in, and the doublethink in the Kremlin can continue to convince their population that we're not at war with NATO yet, even though, for all intents and purposes, they know they are at war with NATO. Peskov has mentioned it. What's the other guy named? The Minister of Foreign Affairs. The hell's his name again? Lavrov, Maria Zakharova, all of them, they've all kind of hinted at that yes, we're indeed already at war with NATO in a de facto sort of way. So it's only a matter of time before they are forced to act on that. They are forced. It should be emphasized that most of these attacks have happened just in the last week. The majority in the last, month, easily. Every single day. And the dots really don't do it justice, because 20 drones here, another 5 drones here. So a lot of these are multiple drone swarm attacks. And they're getting far more brazen. Next, it's going to be St. Petersburg. And you can even see here the pattern that's happening here is they're really skirting this line around Belarus for some reason. Belarus has nuclear weapons. What is that all about? Are they going to be used as the sacrificial lamb to launch these nuclear weapons from? The Wagnerites have now been forced to swear an oath of allegiance to Vladimir Putin. Did I talk about Warren Buffett selling and dumping stocks? Yes, indeed. Warren Buffett, did you know that Berkshire Hathaway, they have had 30% gains in the past year? I remember peak of 2020, everybody was calling Warren Buffett. They were saying how dumb he was because he was selling all his stuff. When he had that market melt up and all the retail investors piled in and everybody made lots of money, Buffett was selling at that time. And look at the track record in the last 5 years. 73% returns in 5 years, 73%. For one share of Berkshire Hathaway, 547,000 USD. This guy knows what's coming. Even Buffett bought gold. They bought stake in Barrick Gold, and he's not a gold guy. He thinks gold is stupid. But, the world doesn't, and it's most definitely the elites don't, the bankers don't. Gold is the basis of the financial system. No matter how many deviations and derivative leaps that we take away from gold, gold is the fundamental basis of our financial system. The gold in the bank dictates everything. We still are in a fractional reserve system based on gold. Anyways, Berkshire Hathaway, he sold $8 billion, and he's sitting on the sidelines with a ton of cash right now, waiting for things to crash. The USA added $1.3 trillion in debt in the past 3 months. So, my friends, this Ukraine war, it's peanuts. It is peanuts. And what do we got here? Oh, yeah, this is the angry Russian. He even has a CCP thing on today. Maybe I'll show you guys this in a bit. But it's peanuts. And so what that tells us is this situation is out of control with respect to the economy. I'm trying to find some economic stuff to put on the screen for you. I don't think I have any offhand here. But so we'll just leave Berkshire Hathaway up there. But, the tech bubble, it's still expanding. The people in tech haven't realized yet. All these tech companies, Nvidia, Tesla, all the rest, they haven't realized the reality of the reality. They have not realized that the decoupling is happening. It's only going to get worse. The Americans are now building a military base right off the coast of Taiwan in the Philippines, like a couple hundred kilometers from Taiwan. And the decoupling is in full swing. You have the rare earth mineral prices increasing. You have, if China goes, then you also lose all of China's labor, okay? You have the war, which of course is going to complicate the supply chains all around the world. But most importantly, what do you need for tech? You need energy. You need cheap electricity. Something which is likely not going to be made available, at least not in the immediate future. In order to actually meet the planet's needs, I think we need to build something like, 15,000 nuclear power plants if we want to go fully clean energy. 15,000 nuclear power. You know how long it takes to build a nuclear power plant? Forget it, it's not going to happen. Okay, this whole move towards Teslas, yeah, the Tesla, I have one, it's fun to drive, but it's not realistic at this point in time. Eventually, it's going to start crippling the power grid, and that's already happening. That's why you're hearing about things happening in Texas, California, because they're putting more stress on the power grid. Teslas cost a lot to run, which is not to say that their net carbon footprint overall, we're not going to have this debate, but that's not to say that it isn't overall across the lifespan of the vehicle going to be less. However, the fact that you can still burn fossil fuels and supplement with fossil fuels is of great importance. So either way, we're entering a period of economic contraction, the great simplification, as I've heard it's called. And that means that the energy available for all this tech that everybody's investing in at forward PA ratios, 200, 1,000, it's just unrealistic. And it's all going to collapse. Apparently, JP Morgan is unloading silver, 14 million ounces, I do believe, or something crazy like that. They got a lot of silver. I think it's even more than that, because 14 million ounces, that would be, what would that be? Roughly in the $250 million range in terms of the actual amount. Now, you might ask yourself, oh, well, this might mean that, silver is not a good buy because the market's now going to be flooded with silver. Well, a lot of people think this is how they corner the market. And I don't know all the ins and outs of it. We're going to have a special guest on in hopefully next week sometime, I'm hoping. And he's going to explain how this whole system works with how they manipulate the spot price of gold. You need to understand there's a difference between the spot price of gold and the real true value of gold. Because remember, gold is the basis of the fractional reserve system. As such, the only real money in circulation is precious metals, as is recognized universally. It's precious metals. So, if you were to take all the dollars out of existence, then the real true value of gold will be basically the amount of ounces of gold out there divided by the amount of dollars that are no longer in circulation. And you come to a number of about $50,000 per ounce. Right now, the spot price that they try to artificially suppress in order to keep people in control, keep people in line, is around $1,900. Actually, it's going up now, $1,970. I can't see it going anywhere below $1,800. If it does, I mean, it's an absolute steal right now in terms of having a dense store of value. That, and this is going to sound silly, but that and freeze-dried food. I mean, freeze-dried food is a great investment that is only going to appreciate. Above and beyond, sure, there's a lot of companies that are still going to fare well, even if we go World War III, because let's face it, there's always going to be an economy. There's going to be a war economy. Hell, I mean, look what happened to Lockheed Martin in the past couple years. So, yeah, there's always going to be an economy, but, if you're just trying to retain your value and you're an honest person who isn't trying to make money off the backs of other people, then precious metals are the way to go, okay? So anyways, enough with the didactic about the gold and all that stuff. There's enough gold bugs out there. We interview a lot of them on this channel. I love them all, but sometimes it's one of those things. It's just like, you can only tell people so many times before it just kind of, okay, we get it. Gold is good. This is what Germany is sending to Ukraine. 20 main battle tanks, Leopard 1A, 28 tracked all-terrain vehicles, 138 Leopard for MG3 for the Leopard 2, 18 Leopard 2A main battle tanks, 40 infantry vehicles, 50 MRAPs, a partridge and a pear tree, blah, blah, blah. The list goes on. That's just from Germany. You guys think this war is going to end in a year? Are you crazy? You know what really baffles me is how people minimize the nuclear threat in the West. I listen to these Twitter space conversations, and it's like these people are just completely downplaying, like, oh, the nuclear thing, it'll never happen. Do you seriously think they've invested billions and billions and hundreds of billions, gajillions and quadrillions of dollars, as Joe Biden would say, into these technologies that they will never consider using them? That's the dumbest possible thing. And it's always these people who think Russia has it in the bag. Oh yeah, they're just, they're just fronting. They're never going to use their nuclear weapons. That's all for show. It's all just for deterrence purposes. Well, maybe it isn't. We're going to talk about that in just a moment. I'm not sure how much battery life I have left. I'm hoping I have a lot. We still got a few things to talk about. Estonia procures drones from Israel in a historic deal. They're going to get 935 drones. These drones are very similar to the bomber drones that Ukraine has been using. Aren't they interesting? I think they've already started taking deliveries, but don't quite quote me on that. Oh yeah, Russia to determine whether drone attack on Peskov perpetrated from Latvia or Estonia. That's from the Kremlin. So it's not like they're brushing this off and that this is all just conspiracy theory. The Kremlin's considering it because it doesn't make sense that those drones would be able to fly. 20 of them, not just one. One you could see, okay, it meandered here and there and was able to bypass, but 20? Anyways, and you got Tucker Carlson. Who knows what's going on with that guy? He thinks World War III is coming. Yeah, tell us something we don't know. Oh yeah, and this person here, Sarah Ashton Cirilio, events confirming the fact that you need to trust the SCU. As stated 9 days ago, Russian defense are collapsing in the south of Ukraine. Tokmak is being evacuated by Russian authorities, according to the mayor of Melitopol. Okay. They're saying it's because of the mayor. Trust the SCU. Yeah, I don't think so. I don't think I'll be trusting you today. Putin is free, commits big reserves in desperate bid to prevent Ukraine breakthrough. Yes, the 76th Division, I believe. Several thousand troops are headed there as we speak. There is an uprising in, what's the place called? Gabon? Oh, that's a nuclear weapon. Oh yeah, Gabon. Here they are. People look so upset that the neo-colonialist government has been ousted, don't they? They just look absolutely terrified for their lives. Africa is starting to fight back, and that is a big problem for Europe, who relies on cheap African energy now that they've completely cut the umbilical cord from Russia. Okay, guys, so I want to talk a little bit about the Cuban Missile Crisis. I made a statement yesterday which I did not provide enough context. I mistakenly said that we have more nuclear weapons now than we did during the Cuban Missile Crisis. I meant to say strategic. I have studied this issue quite a bit, so I know that that information that I had was valid. I just forgot to provide as much context as I should have. We didn't have as many strategic weapons. Strategic are the city killers, okay, the ICBMs. More importantly, Russia didn't have as many. So at that point in time, JFK was well aware, and we found this out in hindsight, that the actual threat posed by the Russians at that point in time wouldn't have changed the strategic balance much, even if they did put these missiles in Cuba, because the United States had this massive advantage in terms of their nuclear arsenal. They had 10 times the amount of nuclear weapons than the Russians at the time, most of those short, medium, tactical range nuclear weapons. But they also had a much larger amount of tried and tested long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles. Those are the ones that Russia can shoot all the way from Russia, and they would land maybe where they wanted them to. Remember, this is in the early age of rocket science, so it wasn't exact science. There was a much higher risk of collateral damage during that time, so some people might make the case that it would have been messier, right? They would have just been firing things and they would have been way off of their intended targets. They shoot one at New York City, it ends up in Washington, or well, maybe they want that to happen, or Boston, or something. You know, who knows where it's going to end up, right? In the middle of upstate New York. You just never know. So the risk was actually much lower then than it is now. For starters, you didn't have Moscow being attacked on a daily basis. You didn't have a high-intensity conflict raging on the front in Europe. That is the number one requirement for a World War III situation, or the equivalent in the Eastern theater. Superpowers, nuclear-armed superpowers, fighting with one another, bombing the primary nuclear superpower in the world today, Russia, who has the most advanced nuclear weapons, bombing their cities on a daily basis. That in itself puts us at a much higher risk than the Cuban Missile Crisis. There were concerns, even if, like the Russians knew at the time, they were aware of this disadvantage they had in terms of strategic weapons. So the idea that they would have ever, when there was that standoff with the submarines or the warships or whatever it was, I can't remember all the details of it, but that they likely never would have initiated, that they always were going to have to back down. Now, however, because there's nuclear parity between the countries, the brinkmanship becomes far more brazen. And that means that we can straddle that line of failure right to the bitter end, because both countries know they have a fighting chance of winning, but there wasn't a great of risk of mutually assured destruction back then as there is now. A few other things to make note of, okay? They had numerous other weapons today than they didn't have back in the day. They did not have the Poseidon nuclear torpedoes that could cause a radioactive tsunami and wipe all the cities on the eastern seaboard off with one nuke. 100 megaton nuke could do that right now. The Russians don't have it in its 100 megaton variant yet, as far as we know, but it could theoretically be outfitted with that. They didn't have finely tuned electromagnetic pulse weapons that could paralyze the power grid, and at that time, we weren't as dependent on electricity in 1962. Now, our entire civilization runs on it. One EMP could cause so much more destruction now than it could then. Hypersonic missiles, ways around that cannot be defended against, and arguably they didn't have the means to defend against ICBMs at that time either. I doubt, maybe against the bombers, which was still one of the main delivery systems that the United States, again, had a huge advantage in. They had like 1,300 bombers all outfitted with nuclear weapons, and even the nukes that the Russians had, they took hours to load and get ready, so they would have been destroyed at that point in time. So we had very less to worry about then. Now we have a lot more to worry about. They didn't have the multiple reentry vehicles like they do on the nuclear warheads now. The Sarmat has 50 nukes, nuclear warheads on one. They shoot one ICBM at something like 20,000 miles an hour. You ain't intercepting that, come on. 20,000 miles an hour. It releases 50 different multiple reentry vehicles, all with nuclear warheads. Some of them have decoys, so you don't know which one you're targeting. They can send hundreds of these things over at the same time. So you're talking about thousands of warheads showering down on the North American continent. Forget about it. These are far more dangerous times. The destruction today would be unimaginable compared, and it would all be precision and targeted. And this is one of the other reasons why we're living in far more dangerous times. Because if you know that you can be far more surgical and you can minimize the radiological footprint, there would be less fallout, because today's nuclear weapons are actually, when you do aerial bursts, you can control the amount of fallout. They're made to have less fallout, which makes us perhaps more apt to want to use them if they have those lesser third or second and third order effects. Then, back in the day, we might have not known a whole lot, and there would have been much messier, just kind of like cell phones back in the day, when they're basically, you talk on them for 5 minutes and you get a brain tumor. Now they figured it out. The same thing kind of pertains to nuclear weapons, albeit to a lesser extent. We have a lot more nuclear submarines, nuclear powered submarines. So we just have more mobile platforms, just advanced delivery systems. It's nothing like the Cuban Missile Crisis. The Cuban Missile Crisis was, whatever. And not to completely minimize it, but I mean, this was the panic buying during the Cuban Missile Crisis. There actually was panic buying. But this is how panic buying looked in the 1960s. You know, if only we could go back in time. Everybody was just neat and orderly. Not to say that, you know, things didn't get pretty violent in the 60s. But look at this guy walking out with a cigarette and they're hauling out their groceries, everybody in an orderly fashion. You know, but see, the thing to remember here is that during this time, guys, this was during the Red Scare. People had a pantry that was stocked. People were aware of the threat. People understood the threat. They had their own little shelters in their basement. It was big business to go and build. You know, a lot of people had fallout shelters. Today, we are completely hopeless and oblivious. We're totally dependent on technology. The proportion of people living in the cities nowadays is much greater than it was back then. That in itself, the predominantly rural population would mitigate the effects of a Mad Max world because people still knew how to live off the land a bit. People were more toughened. There wasn't as many people. Okay, there was probably what, like 2, maybe 3 billion people at that time. 3 billion, I'm guessing. So there was, now the population has almost doubled, tripled since that time. So this is another thing to think about. Far more people need to be fed. We require more complex agricultural technological systems in order to make sure everybody's fed, a more intricate supply chain that can be easily bottlenecked and disrupted. So no, the Cuban Missile Crisis was nothing. Okay, it was always a big nothing burger. Even JFK knew it was a big nothing burger. Yes, there was that standoff, but the Russians always knew they would have lost. So no, today the risk is far, far worse. Just want to make sure I didn't miss anything. Oh, and guess what? In addition to the fact that Moscow is being bombed on a daily basis, how many nations had nuclear weapons back in 1962? Well, you had the Russians and you had the Americans. Now, who do you have? You have Pakistan, you have India, you have Israel. There's rumors that maybe Iran has some. You have North Korea. You have the United States, Russia, China, you know, all the usual suspects. And then you also have all the proxies, the vassal states, where the United States is housing its nuclear weapons. In fact, there was just a deal cut today to send 50 F-35s that are nuclear capable, and that's the reason why they're sending them, to the UK to replace the F-15s there. So, you know, it's really any country under NATO is effectively a nuclear country. Anybody who has the delivery system, which is one of the most important things, if you have the delivery system to send off a nuke and you are allied with a state, a nuclear superpower under their umbrella, you are effectively a nuclear state as well. While you don't have the ability to make that decision, just like Belarus is not in control of the nukes that are on their territory, nonetheless, it increases the likelihood that people are going to use nuclear weapons. And now you don't even have the New START treaties. With most of these countries who have nukes, there are very few treaties. And there are some treaties currently in place, but they're dropping like flies every other week. So, well, slight exaggeration, but we've lost the New START treaty. We lost there's been a few, but most of them, I think that was the last one that just expired. Or it's going to expire in 2026. Not that they're being honored anymore because they're not doing mutual checks anymore for obvious reasons. They're effectively at war with each other. So right now, the United States has about 660 long-range intercontinental ballistic missiles, and the Russians, I believe, have a very similar amount, if not a lot more. Of course, they have tactical nukes. They have, you know, as I've already clearly laid out here, guys. So, you know, I hope that provides a bit more of an explanation for this. And yeah, man, I mean, what more information do you need? I mean, it's happening. Like, it's totally happening. I don't, you know, I try to be the devil's advocate with this, but it's very difficult to not see what's going on here. Thank God that Russia has this macroeconomic plan and they're just trying to win the long game and trying to bring forth this multipolar BRICS world. And I'm not saying, yay, let's all move to Russia. I'm just saying that that's the only thing, that strategy is the only thing that's preventing this from escalating wildly out of control right now. Because there are either elements within NATO, which is what I'm thinking, that are above and beyond the Ukrainian level of things, who are trying to instigate a much broader fight and trying to get this war started and force Russia to play this game of nuclear chicken that it's trying to avoid. Or it's the Ukrainians themselves who are just being allowed to do this, even though the Americans are saying that they do not encourage, notice the language, we don't encourage attacks on Russian soil. But they also said that we are going to respect Ukraine's desire to wage this war as they see fit. So, and if you're providing them with funding, materiel, if you're providing them with intelligence, even guys on the ground in some cases, Moscow can only kick that can down the road before another Evgeny Prigozhin arises. They're trying to stamp it out. But eventually, and this is where it's not that Putin is trying to do a disservice to his people. From his perspective, he's probably saying to himself, look, I know this is going to come down to a nuclear confrontation unless we play it this way. If we go Evgeny Prigozhin's way, if we would have launched nukes at the beginning of this conflict and declared war, then we likely would have, we wouldn't be here anymore. That's, I'm guessing, what they're thinking is. Again, we don't know all the back channels, so be very, very suspicious and critical of any maximalist out there who is so absolute and unwavering in their opinions, like they got it figured out. Oh, it's 9-1, and because I said so, because I'm a former intelligence expert, and yeah, there's 9 dead Ukrainians for every 1 dead Russian, and blah, blah, blah. You hear all these blowhards talking like they know exactly what is going on. I'm very suspicious of people like that. Because, for starters, if you were being a true, honest seeker of truth, you would understand that all of your opinions in the fog of war are dubious, just inherently dubious. It doesn't matter who they are, right? So unless you're right there on the ground. So if you cannot, caveat everything with, well, maybe I'm wrong, or, where am I getting this information that makes me so overconfident about it, then that's suspicious to me. And we often think that the Western methods of propaganda aren't sophisticated, but we got very smart people in this society, okay? And I could foresee, we have a lot of dumb people in government where the government is supposed to be serving the people, but when it comes to screwing the people over, they can get pretty crafty. Now, if I was an intelligence expert in the intelligence community, I'd want to make it look to all of the pro-Russia crowd that Ukraine was actually losing. That's what you would want to do. You wouldn't want to make it look like they were winning. Like, yes, the overt, obvious propaganda of the likes of Sarah Ashton, Cirillo, and the SBU, that's obviously bullshit. Like when the Sun comes out today, they release a video showing this huge explosion in Kiev, and they say, oh, debris fell from an intercepted missile. It's clearly the missile hitting its target in a massive explosion, and they want people to think it's debris. I'm not talking about that level of propaganda. I'm talking about the next level. It's like there's nets. If somebody falls through this level, okay, we'll catch you in the next level, the more sophisticated propaganda level. And I think that's where intelligence agencies operate, in that space. Anyways, that's all I got to say today. Please, if you want to support yourself, the best way to do that is gear up at CanadianPreparedness.com. One of my goals is to try to provide a store where people can buy things that aren't going to depreciate. So things that are just going to last forever. That's the whole prepping thing, is finding something that is going to last a long time. Now, nothing lasts forever, but you can get things that are going to only appreciate as we, go into the future. And a lot of prepping tools, because a lot of them are going to be made illegal, we understand this Orwellian world that we're entering, or Brave New World, if you believe the Huxley point of view. We know that a lot of this stuff is going to be restricted, it's going to be limited, and thus the value of it is only going to increase, whether that's just a bow and arrow, a crossbow, or a knife or other survival trinkets, freeze-dried food, of course. The price of food, as we're going to talk about next week, is going up yet again. So I'd encourage you to just get it while the getting's good, man, because the system is collapsing. It is collapsing. And I'm not saying it's going to be the end of the world, but we're definitely in a transitional phase of human society. I got to go before my microphone craps out. Thanks for watching, guys. Canadian Prepper out.